welcome back to my channel. For today's video, I wanted to talk about potting up and what that process looks like for me. Whether you call it potting up, potting, bumping up, all of those are interchangeable for the same process. And basically what that process is taking seedlings that have been growing in these little 6-cell containers and taking them and transplanting them out into a slightly bigger container. And the reason you want to do that is because these seedlings will outgrow these little cells and they need more room to spread their roots and just really bulk up before it's time for them to go out into the garden. So we're going to kind of walk through, like I said, my process on how I do that. And then it's all really about kind of finding what works for you and what is going to be, work in your garden. So just kind of take all this with a grain of salt. There really is no right or wrong way, but we'll kind of go over what I do. So let's get into it. So you're probably wondering, well, how do I know when to pot up my seedlings? And the biggest sign that I look for is root growth out of the bottom of the cell tray. So when I start to see a lot of roots, or if the roots are getting really long, then that's a good indicator that the plant needs some more room and that we need to bump them up into a bigger container. These pansies that I have in front of me, they have been growing since early January and they've put on some really great root growth, and now I am going to pot them up into these little 2.5-inch pots. I would just like to note quickly that there really is no hard and fast rule on when to pot up your seedlings. I would say I would caution you to bump them up a little bit earlier than late, because if you wait too long, they might get root bound and it'll stunt them. Really the only downside with potting them up, quote, too early is that you're just taking up room under your seed tray or under your seed starting lights. So obviously this cell tray fits 6 plants very nice and neat and compact, but suddenly if I pot all these up into these 2.5-inch pots and I have 6 of them, then that starts to eat up a lot of space. So it's really just how much space do you have under your seed starting rack, and that will kind of inform your decision. But I would say, let the root growth kind of guide you on that. So let's get started on potting up. What you're going to need is some more potting mix, a little bit of water, and you're obviously going to need some bigger pots. So I really like the 2.5-inch pots that I showed earlier. I just think it's a nice size to work with, but use whatever you have. So the first thing I'm going to do is get my soil slightly moist, and I want it to be not super soaking, just a little bit damp. And I almost want it slightly less wet than I would when I'm starting seeds. And the reason is when I transplant or pot up my seedlings, I want to be able to give them a drink of fertilizer pretty quickly after transplanting. So I find that if I have the soil just moist enough where it's no longer dry, then it dries out quicker, and then I can give them some seaweed fertilizer a little bit sooner because the soil's not wet. That's just kind of my process. You could obviously do whatever works for you. This soil looks really good, nice and moist. So when I am working on potting up, I almost always work with one variety at a time just to lessen the chance of me mixing things up. So if I have, my pansies here, if I have antique shades and this penny marina, I don't want to have both of them out of the tray at the same time, because if I take the label out of both and I'm pretty confident that this one is this one and this one is this one, there's just a little bit of room for error and chance that I don't want to take. So I only work with one variety at a time. So I'm going to start with my antique shades, and all I'm going to do is take the pot and just put a little bit of soil in the bottom, probably about a quarter up. I like these cell trays. I just kind of pinch here and then push up in the bottom very gently, and then it comes out, and then I can set this in here and then just kind of put some more dirt around it. Now, when you're potting up, you don't want to plant for 95% of plants, you don't want to bury them or plant them any deeper than they were in the original container. So there are some exceptions to this. The three that I can think of off the top of my head that I would actually plant like as deep as I can and leave, a couple sets of leaves at the top. Those would be tomatoes, basil, and then if I'm starting dahlias from seed, I will do that as well. And the reason I will do that with those types of plants is because they will actually form roots along their stem very easily. It's not hard for them at all, so you're giving it a really strong root structure, and it's going to encourage it to make more roots. So those ones I would plant deeply, but for the majority of the rest of the seedlings, I will make sure to plant it, flush with the side, or flush with how deep it was before. So I'm not going to bury it. So like with these, let me kind of show this. So it's giving it, this much more dirt, but I'm going to put this so it's flush with the top of this. And then once I am done potting this up, I'm going to put my label in it and then set it in this new cell tray right next to me. And I will kind of show you how I label things at the end once I've gotten everything potted up. This is just the system that I found works for me. I don't really like to have one label for every single pot if there's a lot of the same variety, just because that does go through labels very quickly. So the system that I found really works for me, and like I said, I'll show you that later in the video once I get things potted up. But I'm gonna go through and finish potting these up, and then we'll talk about that. So I was able to get a couple trays potted up, and I wanted to, like I said, kind of talk to you about how I organize them and use as few labels as possible, but still remember what things are. So how I think about it, and this just makes sense for me mentally, and I found myself doing this even before I started labeling it this way. So I always start here when I'm looking at a tray. And then, so these are antique shades, pansies. So I follow the tray down here, and then I start another column. And these are all antique shades too. And then I keep going until I hit another label. So this label just happens to be another antique shade. I would just keep going until I hit another one. So these are all antique shades. And then, I get here. This starts Penny Marina. So anything after here is Penny Marina. And then that would be until I get, to the next label. So that's how I always think about it. So that is really the quick start guide to potting up your seedlings. I really encourage you, as you pot up more and more seedlings, to find a process that works for you, especially when it comes to labeling. If you have any questions, or if this video was helpful and you'd like to see more videos like this, then please leave a comment below so I know. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and until next time.